Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team. Today's video is brought to you by Predictable Revenue's Service LinkedIn Outbound. Find out how we can leverage and grow your existing LinkedIn network to book meetings into your calendar at the link below.
We've all wondered why some account executives seem to be closing deals all the time when their colleagues from the same team are hustling to get the minimum amount of deals over the line at the end of their quarter. They're both getting the same amount of meetings booked by their SDRs. So what's the problem? The problem is you can't carry the volume of pipeline that you need if you're not running your deals with best practice deal mechanics. I'm your host, Sarah Hicks, and today on the Predictable Revenue Podcast, I'm going to be chatting to an expert about deal mechanics, how to work and close 3 times the deals. He's a top-performing software sales executive with an entrepreneurial spirit and a passion for winning, currently doing so as an account executive at SharePoint Technologies. Outside of work, he co-hosts the 30 Minutes to President's Club podcast and is the founder and head wrestling coach at USC. Nick Cegelski, welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast.
Well, hey, thanks for having me on, Sarah. I'm really excited for this conversation, especially after the prep call we did. I've been thinking about it for weeks, really. So we're going to have a lot of fun today.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And I've actually been talking to a couple people in the meantime who I'm like, oh, I've got a podcast coming that's just for you. I know exactly what you're looking for and it's coming. So let's get right into it. Nick, tell me what you mean, first of all, by deal mechanics.
Sure. Most salespeople, when they think about their job, and their job is usually to close a certain amount of revenue, they think only in terms of what happens inside of their meetings. So they've got somebody on the phone, they're in a Zoom meeting, they're in an in-person meeting. What are the things they say, the things they show, the way that they interact with the human when they're actually real time? And I don't think enough salespeople think about all of the white space between their meetings. And when you start to focus on that area, you're able to carry a higher volume of pipeline than your peers. And when you carry a higher volume, there's actually a really great feedback loop where you get better faster. And so in my eyes, focusing on the deal mechanics, the way that you carry a deal from inception to close is critical if you want to maximize your income and kill your quota.
Okay, that totally makes sense. And yeah, I think a lot of content that's out there, as you mentioned, is kind of focused on what happens during that call. And certainly a lot of it is even focused on what happens in the first call, like that kind of discovery process within the call and kind of how to go from there. So let's get really tactical about everything that comes after that first call. Tell me about your follow-up process.
Sure. So, okay, let's talk about, I'll give you an example of a proposal call. So I sell pretty complex enterprise deals, and that typically means that I need to have sign off and input from the CFO, the CIO, and the CEO of the companies that I'm selling to. But I might have a proposal review call with just the CFO of the customer. And that's great. We get to a mutual understanding. They understand where we are and we move on. What most sales reps are going to do after that meeting is send the CFO an email with the PDF copy of the proposal saying, Sarah, thank you so much for your time today. Here's the proposal. Let me know if you have any questions. And now Sarah, the CFO's job is to go to the CEO and the CIO and the rest of the group and present in some board meeting this proposal that they literally, it's like playing the game of telephone. They're trying to communicate the things that you told them to the rest of these leaders based on a 4-page PDF that you dumped in their inbox. And they have to try and recreate all of the detail and context that you shared. So tactically, the way this works is I'll go over a proposal with somebody one-on-one. And when I know there's other people who need to see that proposal and understand the context in detail, I will literally tell the CFO, hey, when I get off of this call, here's what I'm going to do. I'll send you a PDF copy of this, but I'm also going to record a 5-minute video going over the proposal just like I did here. And that way you don't have to try and do my job and recreate everything I just explained to you. And so then I use a free tool called Vidyard. I literally record my screen. I use this mic and I talk through the proposal and I send it to them. And when it's done, you would think, okay, that's more work actually. It's more work than just dumping over the proposal to them. But there's this phrase that I love. I learned it I was a college wrestler from my coach. The lazy man works the hardest. And it's easier to not have to create this video and sit down and record it. But then you end up fielding about 47 different questions that come via email. Hey, our CIO has this question about this specific piece. Instead, when you film the video, you cut down on all of that friction. When we talk about deal mechanics, the idea is to reduce the friction from inception to close. So video is a really, really huge way that you can add more context and detail and color throughout the sales cycle, especially when you're managing a complex deal. It's not that bad when you've got one person and it's a 2-call close. But when you're managing a complex deal, you have to be able to find an effective way to communicate information when there are multiple stakeholders who are not involved in every single meeting.
Right. Makes sense. And tell me about how you use collateral to kind of help in the process.
So I think too many sales reps like heavily lean on their collateral to the point that they don't understand something. So in my mind, collateral is used to supplement the conversations that you have. So if somebody wants to know about my implementation and onboarding process, I can't just be like, yeah, here's a PDF talking about it. You actually you can do the same video thing. You can literally talk through and here's the issue is most content and collateral is way too long. I have a 6-page PDF that my marketing team put together that is beautiful. And it talks about every single thing that somebody could want to know about the onboarding process. But there's a specific thing when somebody asks you the question, what's onboarding and implementation look like? You actually have to ask and drill a little bit deeper. And so this goes all the way back to our favorite thing to talk about, which is discovery skills, which is, okay, well, what part about onboarding are you hoping to learn more about? Okay, why specifically that? And then you can target and tailor your response. And then instead of dumping a 6-page PDF, you can send and you can say, hey, Sarah, thanks again for your time. You and I talked about the onboarding process, and I know you were really curious. You know, we had a good discussion about what the data migration piece looks like. Page 3 talks exactly about that, and I've highlighted the salient points for you in this email, but if you want to go into the doc, you can. So again, you've got to do the work for the customer. You can't just dump these documents into their inbox and expect them to contextualize for the rest of the company.
Right. That totally makes sense. Is there anything else that you do in between the meetings, or would you say those are like the pillars of...
No. Biggest one for me is, okay, so we talk about the phone all the time in sales. There's this love-hate relationship that I think every salesperson has with the phone. And for some reason, salespeople only talk about the telephone in the context of prospecting. We only ever talk about the phone in the context of, do you make cold calls? Is cold calling dead? Is cold calling annoying? But we don't use the phone enough when we're working an active deal. So what can happen sometimes is you'll get an email from a customer and they'll email you a question. And you could just email them a response. And maybe it's a super simple question and you can bang out the response. Maybe you have a template, whatever. But for the most part, in my mind, I want any and every excuse to have a conversation with my customer. So if somebody emails me something, I'm going to call them. I'm going to try to have conversations with them as frequently as appropriate within a deal cycle. One area that I'll use this is the demo, the group demo. So something that happens in my sales cycle is we'll have an hour-long demo and 6 people from my prospective customer will join that Zoom meeting. And after the meeting, most sales reps are going to lean on email because they're not totally comfortable coldish call. It's not really a cold call anymore, but it's like, the CFO still wasn't expecting you to call them after the demo. And they're like, that's a little weird. That's annoying. They have other things to do. But something I do after every single demo is I call each and every person who was on that meeting to try and get feedback. And then also understand, was there anything that you were hoping to see that we didn't address today? And what reservations do you have right now? Anything that you need me to take care of to help you feel more comfortable with this. And the IT director you call after is going to say, hey, yeah, I didn't want to speak up, but I'm really curious about your company's security efforts and disaster recovery. Can you send me some details on that? Great. Now I've taken care of something that I didn't even know existed. So you've got to lean heavily on the phone between demos, between meetings, especially in a multi-stakeholder deal. And that's what I'm talking through because that's what I've sold for so long. You need to have individual conversations with everybody, and that actually helps build consensus. You can't expect to just get in these big hurrah meetings with 8 people there and have everybody aligned and everybody's individual needs met. So those one-on-one conversations after the fact are tremendously helpful. The other thing, if you can't get somebody on the phone, I use LinkedIn like crazy, but not for the purpose of what most sales reps think LinkedIn is to be used for, which is like blasting your company, like resharing your company's blog post and saying, great read here from XYZ. I'm like, that doesn't tell me anything, and it's lazy. And so I use LinkedIn, like I post my own stuff on LinkedIn, but I connect with every single person after every single meeting. So even if you, Sarah, were in the meeting for 15 minutes and left early, I'm connecting with you, I'm sending you a personal message, and then I'm following up after the fact to have a conversation. And it's amazing the way people's tone will change as soon as they move off of their company LinkedIn. So I sell to law firms, and most attorneys, they're a little buttoned up, especially at work. And so you wouldn't expect them to show like this huge, big personality. So I connected with this guy who's like 30 years my senior, like way above me in terms of his professional career. And we're having a conversation about the demo we showed. And the guy goes, dude, that was such a sick demo. That was awesome. I'm so pumped for your product. And I'm like, what? Like I would never, and so he would have sent an email like that, but the walls come down a little bit when you move into a different domain. Mm-hmm. Most people are used to just using the corporate email and the corporate email speak or call them on their office phone. When you can move the method of communication, I think you start to break down this like buyer-seller friction, and you're just a person talking to a person. So answer to your question is the phone, the LinkedIn, the video messages, like film something on your cell phone and literally send. You have an introductory meeting with somebody, send them a video of you recapping the conversation instead of your lame templated recap email.
Yeah.
Insert yourself, make yourself a real human being. But the last thing I'll give you about why I love video and the phone is I was a public relations major in college. It's kind of like journalism. And so drilled into my head all through college was you can't have any typos, or you've got to proofread the heck out of any written communication. It's still in my brain. Like I reread all of my emails like 6 times. I read them out loud. I put them in this app that literally reads my emails out loud to me to make sure I hear it from a different voice. Like I don't want typos. That slows me down tremendously though. You don't have to worry about typos or formatting of the text or punctuation errors when you're using video or the phone. And so I heavily lean on verbal communication because it is so much faster. The problem is most sales reps go in the other direction. They would rather write out their perfectly thought out response via email as opposed to maybe stumbling and fumbling through a conversation with somebody. The thing is, people want to have a real conversation, not see your copy and pasted templated answer to when they ask about how your company does X.
Sure. Yeah, it's so much more forgivable to kind of have a fumble in your words than, to kind of have this non-personal, as you mentioned, kind of templatized back and forth.
Yeah.
And I think one of the kind of key points that you've been talking to, and it's using the video, the phone, and the LinkedIn, and also, as you mentioned, those pre-recorded video explanations of things. Yeah. It's a way to involve every single decision maker as an individual. And I think so many people probably have that big group email where everybody is CC'd and the correspondence just goes out to that whole group the whole time. Yeah. There may be a small instance where somebody asks a particular question, and within the body of that group email, someone goes, and so to your point, and then answers it. But yeah, you're definitely hitting the nail on the head. I mean, I don't know a lot of examples where closers are taking this time to make it so individual. But as you're saying, if you're doing it over the phone or you're doing it over video, it's actually quicker than if you're trying to write out these perfect emails. So if you guys are listening right now and you're an account executive, take note of that, because absolutely it can probably seem quite daunting to want to try and have to personalize the process to every single one of these decision makers, but it's actually way easier because it's as quick as just the conversation that Nick and I are having now. It's much easier that way.
Well, okay, so you've got two ways you could go. You can get off the demo with the 6 people and send this big mass email with 80 lines of text to everybody who was in the meeting, and you're going to get like one reply, yeah, thanks, Nick, for the demo. And most people, if they have what might be a dumb question or a question that doesn't, like, it's not relevant to the rest of the group, so your IT person has a question, they're not going to reply all. They might not even reply to you on that mass email because you sent it to the whole group. And it takes time to put together that email. Instead, just pick up the phone and knock out your 6 calls and have conversations with people. And then you don't have to worry about like, oh, did I say the right thing here? The other great thing about that is you have more open and honest communication. So one of the things that in a competitive deal you want to understand is who is the competition and where do you sit relative to them? Are you winning the deal and why? Are you losing the deal right now and why? And if you ask somebody that via email, they're going to be a little bit more guarded. And it's actually a good thing for the customer when you understand who the competition is, because I don't know about you, I see this competitor all day, every day, and I understand whether or not they're a good fit for what you've shared with me. And then if they're actually a much, much better fit, I probably know, and they say we're losing the deal right now. Well, now I know how real this thing is and how much time I want to pour into and invest in it. So the other thing when it comes to deal mechanics is understanding and picking and choosing the deals that you truly invest your time in, because it's not a good use of your time to chase down every single customer in the world. It's a better use of your time to be very, very specific about where you spend your time so that you have the best chance of winning. And so I'm not saying you ignore a customer who puts in an inbound lead who might be a decent fit for you, but you're like, they're a little bit too small. I think you talk to anyone who comes in, but this comes back to the transparency and the honesty piece. If somebody's not a fit, it's okay to give them an out, to tell you, hey, Nick, I'm actually realizing that you guys might be a little bit too big for us. Hey, that's good. I want to know that stuff. So I feel like getting to the honesty piece, the truth, is so important. But again, you're not going to do that if you fire off a canned recap email after every meeting you have.
Yeah. Well, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. How would you in practice give the prospect an out? How kind of conversationally do you actually make that happen?
Yeah. So I think it starts with the way that you kick off any meeting. So there's 2 things you need to do. One, you need to have time at the end of any meeting to give them an out. So what I typically will do is set an agenda in the beginning and let them know, hey, at the end, we've got here's something a lot of sales reps struggle with, and this kills your deal mechanics. It's getting to the next step. And I'll get back to your original question, but getting the next steps on the books is something that I think every salesperson knows is important. You can't have a deal if it's just sitting in purgatory and you don't know where you go next. The problem is we go into a 30-minute discovery meeting and we know the next step is a demo. And it's a 30-minute discovery meeting and we talk and talk and talk and the conversation's going great. And now it's minute 29 and the person is like, okay, I got to get to my next meeting. It's a big one. I have a meeting with my boss. And the sales rep goes, all right, well, let's talk about what are next steps here. Mm-hmm. Well, now you're asking the prospect to think in their brain, well, what the heck do we do from here? And they're also like, okay, 45 seconds till my next call starts. I got to go. So I think in order to even get to that place of honesty and clarity where you're talking about are we a fit or not and giving them an out, you need to give them space to determine, like to have that conversation. Because if you don't do that, you end up living in this world of touching base and checking in with 2/3 of your pipeline, and that it kills your time. If I'm touching base with 23 open opportunities, that's 23 calls that I could have made to new prospects. So my goal with every opportunity I work is get it in, get it out, make a decision on every single call, meeting, whatever, to figure out, are we in or are we out? Because if we're out, I want to know that. I don't want to clog up your inbox with, hey, touching base, checking in, seeing where we are with this, if they've already decided we're not a fit. So you got to set the stage up front. So initial meeting with somebody, here's what you do. You confirm the time. And if they say, yep, I've got 30 minutes here, awesome. Why don't we do this? Let's stop 5 minutes early. And typically once we've made it through this initial call, you have one of two things will happen. You might decide that we are not a good fit for you on this call. And if that's the case, you're not going to hurt my feelings. please just tell me. I don't want to be the sales rep that bothers you endlessly once you've decided we're probably not a good fit. You won't hurt my feelings. If it does look like we're a fit, here's typically where we would go for a next step. And actually, I'll lay out a couple of the next steps so the prospect has it in their mind. One of two things is going to happen. They're either going to correct you and say, actually, we're not going to go that way. Or they're going to say, yeah, that sounds fine. Let's stop those 5 minutes early. Now, in those last 5 minutes, you can remind them, hey, we talked about at the beginning, one of two things was going to happen. I'm really curious to hear where you are. And if it seems like it's not a fit, here's the key. I don't think you ever want to lead the customer and say, well, based on what you've told me, this is a perfect fit, because every sales rep in the world thinks their product is going to change the world and is a perfect fit. So I don't think you ever lead them and say, all right, it looks like this is a fit. But you do the inverse of that, which is if it looks like it's not a fit, you can end a call and say, hey, Sarah, okay, we've got 5 minutes left here. We talked about deciding whether or not we were going to move forward in the conversation and do a demo. I'm getting the sense that we're not a great fit for you because of these three things that you said. Are you feeling the same thing? Again, one of two things is going to happen there. They're either going to correct you and they're going to say, no, actually, I really liked it. I do want to move to that step. Well, great. Two good things happen. One, the deal's moving forward. Two, you're not the pushy sales rep who's cramming the product down their throat. And then if it's not a fit, well, now you've given them the chance to say no. They're just agreeing with you. Yeah, Nick, you're right. As opposed to this friction of the sales rep being like, oh, this was a great call. I can't wait to show you the product. And in the back of their mind, they're like, oh, this was awful. Like, they're not a fit for these three reasons. All right, Nick, yeah, why don't you send me some times over email? Oh, perfect. I get to tell my boss this one's a commit for sure. I'm going to spend all this time looking at my calendar, finding out some perfect times to email them. I'm going to send them an email like I've never drafted before. And then, oh, they didn't reply. They must be really busy. Let me touch base with them next week. Oh, they still didn't get back to me. Let me check in with them. And so you've got to get them in or get them out, and don't waste your time or theirs.
Do you think that you ever kind of leave a bad taste in their mouth if you kind of say something like, I saw that it was maybe not a fit because of these three reasons. Do you agree? Do you think you'd ever kind of, push somebody towards a no or something, or have you not encountered that?
Well, you want to be respectful in the way that you are presenting it. So if I get to the end of the call and I'm like, oh, there's no way this customer is going to be able to afford this, maybe I say, okay, well, Sarah, before we get off this call, I want to give you a sense of what this is going to cost, because I want to make sure that I'm not wasting your time. I want to be respectful of your time. I think if it comes from a place and the tone is, look, I'm trying to get you all these details so you know whether or not it's worth spending more time on this, no one's going to be upset with you. Yeah. And it's actually really refreshing to hear a sales rep be like, look, I work for XYZ company, but my number one goal is to figure out if there's a match here. And so if there's not a match, I'm not the guy who's going to sit here and try to cram it, a square peg into a round hole. So I've always been afraid of, are they going to be offended that the sales rep said, oh, it's not a good fit? Right. And so the tone is really important. If you say, Mark, you are way too small for us. I don't think this is going to be a fit. Well, Mark might be offended because he has big growth plans. And so I think it's a soft proposal. Like, Mark, I love the phrase, I'm getting the sense that, or Mark, typically our customers are between 200 and 500 employees. Part of me is concerned because your group is five folks in your shop right now. And so I want to make sure that that's something that we have a discussion about so that I'm not leading you the wrong direction. Who's going to be upset about that?
Yeah, totally makes sense. So it's definitely all about the kind of tone and the approach that you take, and kind of, as you've mentioned with a couple of different of your tactics here, it's putting the ball in their court, kind of leaving it up to them to tell you whether it's a yes or a no, and providing them with kind of all the value and all the information that they need, but then ultimately giving it to them to make that decision, but not assuming, always making sure you actually get the verbal decision from them.
Yes, you have to get it out there. And the sales purists listening to this might say, well, no, you've got to lead your customer. You've got to drag them in the right direction. It's not that I'm not doing that. I am literally proposing, hey, the next place we would go if you feel like this is a fit is X. Do you feel like what we talked about today covered what you needed to see to move to that? And so it's the autonomy thing. The customer wants to feel like it is their decision, not that the sales rep saying is, well, here's another thing, like you have to remove from your vocabulary. Anytime you as a salesperson say, I would love to, or I would like to, I would like to show you a demo. Well, they don't care what you would like to do. They care about solving their business problem. And so what you are doing is you are presenting them with, here's where we go if you think we can solve your problem. Please let me know if you think we can still solve your problem. Again, one of two things happens. They tell you that they don't think you can solve the problem, which gives you the opportunity to now counter that. Well, if they say, well, Sarah, I don't think this is a good fit because you don't integrate with our HR software. Well, if you actually do integrate with the HR software, now you have a chance to correct them or more deeply understand why is that so important. And so it just gives you a chance to deal with the objection that otherwise would be unknown. We leave all of these calls with not, and again, it's discovery, which isn't fun or sexy, but you've got to deeply understand what's going on here in your customer's brain in order to address any challenges that the deal could face.
Yeah, of course. It all seems like such a kind of no-brainers once you've explained it like this, but I do think there is like a lack of this type of content out there, and it's usually up to the rep themselves to kind of create their own process from scratch. Of course, there's a degree of kind of best practices or templates that they're given, or kind of they're guided through the first few of their deals. But all of these kind of in-between tactics that you've come up with here, there's not a lot of content on that. So I'm so happy to have had you on the show and be able to share all of this really interesting stuff with our listeners. I think it would be great to do a little kind of recap of what we chatted about here. So if we're thinking about the deal mechanics and what happens in between those calls, remind us what we want to do with collateral.
Yep. So I think you need to get context around collateral, find out exactly why the customer wants a piece of collateral, and then do the work for them. So pull out, hey, page 3 is most relevant to what you asked about, not here's in your inbox 4 PDF documents that covers any and every question you could have about this. And then video also is a great way, especially to give context around collateral. I don't think if you're sending that onboarding document we talked about earlier, you have to film a video of yourself going over it, but anything with a degree of complexity, you should put together a video explaining. So that way your customer doesn't have to do the work. They don't have to be the one to explain the proposal to the 6 other people at their company that need to see it. They can just say, hey, here's the video of Nick, the sales reps, going over this. If you have any questions after watching, let me know. You make it easier for them.
Yeah. And remind us how to kind of involve all the decision makers after you get off that call.
Yeah, a couple ways. So you've got picking up the phone and calling them, which is for some reason a shocker to most salespeople. Like, get off a 6-person demo and call each person and find out, did we miss anything? Any questions? Any reservations? What do they think? You get open and honest feedback when you have one-on-one conversations, as opposed to the big group where everyone is, they don't want to speak up. They're less apt to speak up. So you've got your one-on-one conversations. You've got your custom LinkedIn message after every single meeting with every single new person who you meet at the company, and then try to engage them on there. That's a great place to use video. So film yourself saying, look, Sarah, it was so nice to meet you today. Like, thanks for joining the demo. By the way, any questions? Like you can actually do that, and they'll engage with you back. And then the last piece is, like, you really want to make that follow-up one-on-one as opposed to the mass group templated email. Instead, if you're going to put together this templated email, send it to each person individually instead of the group. And I think you're more apt to get responses.
And then on actual individual meetings, because that's kind of the in-between meetings, on actual meetings, how do we set next steps?
So you've got to prep them, prime them in the beginning to say, hey, we're going to carve out the last 5 minutes and have a hard stop so you can get to your next meeting. And then you've got to set the beginning of that meeting's agenda up front to say, hey, we're going to talk about next steps here. So give them the space, both from a time on the clock and mentally perspective, and then let them know that that's what that space is going to be used for.
And then how do we weed out those opportunities that are possibly not going to be a fit?
You got to give your customer a chance to have an out. So if you feel like it might not be a fit, just say it. Just say, hey, I'm getting the sense that this might not be a fit because of the 2 things you said about how we don't fit your security requirements. Okay, great. Now they'll tell you. They're just agreeing with you, as opposed to having to disagree with the overeager sales rep who thinks their product is going to change their customer's entire business.
Amazing. So something we mentioned way at the beginning of this podcast and kind of the crux of the whole thing that we've been talking about is that if you have a great process like this, it allows you not only to manage each individual deal with kind of more effectiveness, but it allows you to manage more deals at once, which in turn means that you're going to have more at-bats and you're going to close more deals. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, there's a feedback loop. So you have a limited amount of time in your workday to talk to customers and move deals forward. And the less time that you spend chasing deals that are not, the more time that you can spend working deals that are. And the way you get better as a salesperson is in two ways. One, learning. So if you've made it this deep in the podcast, clearly you're somewhat okay at that. Like you're listening to something to help your profession. The other way is actual application. You can't just be a theorist. You can't just sit and read every book on a subject and expect to know how to put it into practice. The way you put it into practice is actual application. And so the more time I can spend working deals and the less time I can spend chasing deals means more at-bats. More at-bats, there's a feedback loop. I get better and better and better. And there's a compounding interest to that. There's a compounding growth. I then make huge jumps over the rep who's touching base and checking in for half of their pipeline. And so you end up just getting so much better and sharper and figuring out little nuances about how you sell what you sell. And that's how you end up selling 3x what somebody at the bottom of the tier does.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for being on the podcast. This was super informative, super interesting. I think we gave some really clear tactics that I think everybody on this podcast listening right now, who is an account executive or even a full cycle kind of closer, you can definitely apply these things. Let us know in the comments. Let us know on the Predictable Revenue LinkedIn page, anywhere. If it's worked for you, we'd love to hear from you. And Nick, if people want to chat to you further, if they want to learn more from you, where can they do that?
Well, I appreciate everyone listening. If you loved it, great. If you hated it, send me an angry LinkedIn message. That way I know that what I'm doing is not working for you. But actually get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I respond to every single message that people send me, except for the weird pitches that I get about Bitcoin and Forex on the first message. But yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Nice. And you guys can also listen to Nick on the 30 Minutes to President's Club podcast, where they usually dive into really actionable strategies similar to this one. So it's a great place to pick up new tips and tricks on how to 3x your deals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Nick. Have a good one.
Take care.
All right. Shout out to Predictable Revenue's Service LinkedIn Outbound Service for sponsoring this video. As a founder and sales leader myself, I know most of the best practices in terms of like what I need to be doing on LinkedIn, but sometimes I just don't have the time. You know what the right things to do are, but it comes down to a trade-off of where's my time better spent, and can I find somebody to click around on LinkedIn for me and book meetings, and then I can focus on higher level activities. And so think about it. What's the best use of your time? If you're a founder, sales leader, and you have a team, you need some meetings, I'd encourage you to check it out. I'm using it myself. I'm obviously the founder, so eating our own dog food. But if you're curious, click the link below to learn more.